Don't call me baby. Bye, I'm dying. Chapter 5. You're my dad! Boogie, boogie, boogie! Problem Children group chat. Chat includes Funky Elmos, Zero, Alien Queen, Ashido, Nyong, Ida, Small Bean, Midoriya, Mr. Murder, Bakugo, My Meld, Shinso, Octopus, Shoji, Keklian, Hagagare, Kung Fu Panda, Ojiro, Yao Mamo, Yoyorozu, Defying Gravity, Oberaga, Pikachu, Kaminari, Die Hard, Kirishima, Punk Butch, Jiro, Francophile, Aoyama, Kermit, Asui, Snow White, Koda, Large Boy, Sato, Edgy, Tokoyami, Fucka Never, Todoroki, and Boss, Aizawa. 11:34. Mr. Murder. Small Bean, come grab your mother downstairs. This fucking class is already hyper enough without her help. Shoda looked up from some casework to see the message lighting up his phone, frowning for a second before recalling that Inko Midoriya had filled out a weekend visitation request form a few weeks ago. Humming to himself, he began to finalize some case details, figuring that he should probably go greet the woman as a show of UA hospitality, as well as to demonstrate to the woman that her son was under capable adult supervision in the dorms, since Inko had been one of the most reluctant of all Mone's parents to allow her child to live on campus after the events of Camino. Not that he blamed her, really. Defying Gravity. Oh, Mama Midoriya's here, I'm coming! Bank Butch. How would she make us hyper? What the heck? Mr. Murder. She brought hella baked goods. Nyum. That feels more like vernacular than swearing, so I'll let it pass. Mr. Murder. Whatever for, I just go get some brownies. Boss. Don't let Tokoyami have any if there are nuts. Pikachu. We know, Dad. Boss. Don't make me ground you. Nyum. You mean give him detention? Boss. That's what I said. Large Boy. Midoriya, your mother is my platonic soulmate. Holy hell, we need to swap recipes. Small Bean. Little weird, but I'll let it slide since half of your personality is baking on my way down now. Large Boy. Hey! I mean, it's true, but you shouldn't say it. Kekleon. Oh yeah, but do not. Megaphile. It's true, but you shouldn't say it. Sparkles! Kekleon. Classics don't need sparkles! Rolling his eyes, Shota closed his laptop and left his apartment, the commotion from the common room filtering up the stairs as he descended. By the time he arrived on the first floor, a good portion of his class was filtering in and out of the kitchen, small plates full of everything from cake to cookies to brownies. Deep pans full of the goods sat on the kitchen island, watching some of the most promising hero students of the next generation use their training for things it definitely wasn't intended for. Inko Midoriya off to the side with a slightly concerned, but mostly amused, smile hidden behind a hand as she witnessed Zero finally perfect his headlock on Jiro. One of the benefits of having such an explosive boy as Bakugo in his homeroom, Shota had come to realize, was that he worked just as well to help quiet the class as to rile them up. It had become apparent over the past year of teaching the boy that none of his previous teachers had cracked down on his casual quirk usage, as Bakugo had a habit of letting off small explosions whenever he got irritated, for example, right now. 1A had become so used to this habit, however, that when the small explosions immediately stopped, courtesy of Shota's own quirk, the rest of the class immediately looks over to see what caused the explosions to cease, and therefore see Shota, sending a final warning glare at his class to behave, with a special one leveled at Zero, who grinned sheepishly as Jiro rubbed her neck in irritation next to him. He turned towards Inko with the most hospitable smile he could muster at the moment, which probably ended up looking more like a grimace. Luckily, Inko knew him well enough by now to know the difference. Midoriya-san, he greeted, one of his hands shaking hers briefly before returning to his jumpsuit pocket. How are you? Better, now that I can see my boy. The middle-aged woman laughed and placed a hand gently on her son's back as Izuku flushed crimson and tried to imitate a turtle, and receding into his shirt. And how are you, Aizawa-san? The kids aren't giving you too much trouble, are they? Not more than usual, Shota replied easily. That's good. Inko smiled as she then slid her short arm around her son's waist. Shota wondered how old the boy had been when he'd surpassed her in height. Izuku's light flush of embarrassment was like a warm, happy glow surrounding him. I didn't know they would be so excited over a few baked goods. Inko continued with a glance over at the kitchen island, where the kids of 1A had settled down a bit and continued to load their plates up with more sugar than was likely healthy. It's because your food is the best, Midoriya-san! Uraraka chirped as she settled down on the couch with a plate full of a few cookies and a small slice of bundt cake. And it's more than just a few baked goods, Shota thought amusedly, though he held off on saying so. Oh, you're too kind. Inko laughed with a slight blush. It's objectively true, ma'am. Todoroki piped up from where he stood near the TV, nibbling on a snickerdoodle. Todoroki-kun! Inko laughed again, covering her face with both hands as her son grinned proudly. We should probably get going, Mom. Izuku nudged her after a second, to which the older woman uncovered her smiling face and nodded in agreement, shifting her purse on her shoulder. Yes, you're right, dear, she complied, turning towards the door with one hand on Izuku's shoulder. I'll have him back by curfew, Aizawa-san. Inko called back to Shota, who gave a one-handed wave of acknowledgement. Take care, he responded as the two left the building. A second later, Shota turned to level a glare at Sero, who immediately froze a cupcake halfway to his mouth. After a moment, the glare dissolved into a withering look. Sero, next time you practice your headlock, please wait for gym class. Tori-sensei. A little before 8 p.m., both the Midoriyas walked back through the front door, a few bags on each arm, and Izuku already beat bad from the reaction he knew it would incite. Somewhat surprisingly, he only got a few light bibbings about the shopping haul, probably in no small part due to the look of pure happiness on Inko Midoriya's face at being able to spend the day with her boy. No one wanted to risk making the woman self-conscious or unhappy while she was there. Unsurprisingly, when she left, the kids' group chat blew up with comments. Problem children, group chat, 2028. Die Hard. You, Midoriya, your mom's the bomb! Defying gravity. I always forget how much I love her until she visits. Nyum. Truly, she's a terrific woman. Mr. Murder. Yeah, everyone who ever meets her loves Auntie Inko. Funky elbows. Wait, you and Midoriya are related? Small Bean. Oh, no. Kachan and I just grew up together because our moms were really good friends in university. So Kachan's mom became Aunt Mitsuki to me, and my mom became Auntie Inko to him. Funky elbows. Oh, okay. I knew you guys went to the same middle school, but I didn't realize how long you'd known each other. Mr. Murder. Our moms go pretty far back, so we were always shoved together as kids. Alien Queen. What's your mom like that, Bakugo? She must be really nice if she hangs around Midoriya's mom so much. Small Bean. Oh, no, not really. Funky elbows. What, really? Small Bean. It was kind of bad for a little while, but I don't want to air dirty laundry that's not mine or anything. Mr. Murder. I don't give a shit. Small Bean. It just wasn't the best environment with Aunt Mitsuki specifically. Die Hard. Bakugo, you okay if we talk about it? Mr. Murder, fuck or whatever, it's not like I got half and half some situation. Defying gravity. Something doesn't have to be worse than something else to be wrong for you, you know, Bakugo-kun? Mr. Murder. Yeah, I've been told I'm not the most objective viewpoint on this, so I'm not the best person to explain it anyway. Small Bean. I could, if you'd like. Mr. Murder. Again, I don't give a shit. Small Bean. So, like, Kachan's explosive personality is as much a product of his upbringing as it is of his quirk. Mr. Murder. Hey, fuck you. Die-eyed. Babe, you know I didn't mean it like that. We love you and your explosive personality. Alien Queen. Yeah, dude! Imagining you not blowing up at least every once in a while is actually uncomfy. Fucking never. What she said. Snow White. What they said. Mr. Murder. Whatever. Small Bean. It's true! Sorry, I didn't mean that to be incendiary. Pikachu. Was that a pun? No. Why are you so shocked? Pikachu. Oh my god! Small bean. So, anyway, Aunt Mitsuki isn't a bad person, but she's very aggressive very often. Mr. Murder, you make it sound like you beat my ass. Small bean. Kachan, I've literally been in the room when we were 5 as she threatened to do so. Mr. Murder, it wasn't that bad, fuck. Small bean. She hit you, Kachan. Edgy. I see why you're not a good neutral party to discuss what happened. It's often hard to acknowledge that a loved one may have wronged you. Mr. Murder, it's just fucking weird to think about. Small bean. She was also very physical in showing affection. It makes sense that it would blur the lines. Alien Queen. What about your dad, dude? Mr. Murder. My old man is a fucking pussy. Nyum. I understand this is a sensitive topic, but please, language! Small bean. What he means is Uncle Masaru has learned it's usually better to not get involved. Large boy. Yo, that really sucks. I'm sorry, dude. Mr. Murder. Whatever. It's not like they don't fucking love me or whatever. Small bean. Their way of showing it just wasn't super healthy. Mr. Murder. I always have my needs met and shit. Defying gravity. That doesn't mean it wasn't what you deserved, you know, Bakugo-kun? Mr. Murder. Yeah. Small bean. The good news is that Uncle Masaru and Aunt Mitsuki are trying to get better at stuff. Defying gravity. That's great! Mr. Murder. Yeah, they're reading books and the old hag is going to anger management classes. Fucking never. How did they realize they were being assholes? Mr. Murder. Probably the same way I never did. Boss. Yup. Fucking never. Ah. Punk butch? Question mark? Mr. Murder. Sensei wait ape shit. Boss. Yup. Punk butch. Ah. Boss. Specifically during the home visits to get permission for the norm living situation. A lot of things clicked. With Todoroki, it happened sooner. Snow White. Clap. Thumbs up. Prayers are answered. Alien Queen. Yeah, I am Dakota! Fucking never. My old man's trying to change too, I think. Don't know, haven't been really paying attention since I've got my own life to deal with, and I don't own him anything. Pikachu. Man, that meant Sensei went off the rails on that one. Almost wish I'd gotten to see it. Small bean. No, you don't. Fucking never. No, you don't. Boss. No, you don't. Pikachu. Nonin! Yamamo. Wait, was Midoriya there? Fucking never. He's the one who convinced me to go to Aizawa Sensei for help in the first place. Boss. And I'm very proud of both of you for it. Small bean. Smiley face. Alien Queen. Gazoo strikes again! Boss. I'm boss now, you little big menace. Alien Queen. Shit! Mr. Murder. Anyway, half and half and I can't be the only ones with home issues. Nyum. Mr. Murder. Fuck, I didn't mean it like that. Funky elbows. We know, dude! You're good! Die hard. For anyone who still doesn't speak Bakugo, he just wants to be done talking about his home life. Small bean. I mean, you all know about my dad! Octopus. I missed this? What? Small bean. He went to the grocery store 9 years ago and never came back. Fucking never. He wants to make sure he gets the right kind of milk. Small bean. Shit, you're right! Defying gravity. That really sucks, Deku-kun. I'm sorry! Small bean. Don't worry about it, Overrocket-chan. Mom and I are mostly over it by this point anyway, haha. Alien Queen. Yeah, and your mom seems super sweet and perfect, so who needs 10 many dads, am I right? Mr. Murder. Wow. Aunt Inko hasn't always been perfect. Small bean. I mean, it's fine, it was forever ago, she was just worried about me. Mr. Murder. It was less than 2 years ago. Boss. Do I need to do another intervention? Small bean. No, it's fine! Boss. Looks at you questioningly. Snow White. Big blush! Boss. Bakugo. Mr. Murder. Nah, the nerd's right, and either way, there's not much to do about it now. Small bean. Not to throw shade, Kachan, but I didn't realize you noticed or cared. Kekleon. Damn! Mr. Murder. Yeah, well, younger me was a little shit. Pikachu. Younger? Was? Mr. Murder, shut up, Pikachu. That Zuko stored it out either way, if he wants. Large boy, it's almost hard to see Midoriya-san as anything other than a perfect parent. Small mean, she did her best, I don't blame her. So, as you know, my quirk manifested real late. Boss, I'm still mad I didn't know that was the case until halfway through your first year, but continue. Small bean. Anyway, so for a long time I was essentially quirkless. Diagnosed quirkless even, but I'm a stubborn bitch and still wanted to be a hero. Mr. Murder. Can't confirm it was fucking irritating and he wouldn't shut up about it. Small bean. Takes one to know one, Gachan. Yo, mama. Una reverse card. Bunk butch. Damn, babe. Savage. Yo, mama. Thanks. Small bean. Anyway, long story short, my mom's always been really supportive of me, except for that. Funky elbows. Wait, she didn't want you to be a hero? Alien Queen. It's kind of weird to think of Midori in anything other than heroics. Small bean. Oh, thank you. But yeah, she wasn't a fan. She's always been protective, and I'm her only child, and the odds of a quirkless hero against, say, a villain on trigger? Boss, as one of the heads on that case, I can confirm it's probably not the best idea, but it could be done. Small bean. Yeah, but she's my mom and doesn't want to, bury me, you know? Edgy. Wow, that's dark even for me. Mind meld. Changing the subject because it looks sad now. Small bean. So yeah, my mom and I got into a lot of arguments about that and probably contributed to a lot of my self-confidence issues. Snow White. Sad face. Francophile. RT. Kermit. RT. Small bean. It's fine now. She's proud and supportive and I'm working on this stuff anyway. Kiklian. Smile. Kung Fu Panda. RT. Boss. RT. Small bean. Anyway, anyone else want to vibe with the Mommy Issues Club? Party of 3? Mr. Murder. Don't fucking call it that. Die Hard. No, fam, both of my moms are super rad. Edgy. Both? Die Hard. Yeah, man, my moms are super good for each other. It's hella manly. Pikachu. I'm not sure if your obsession with things being manly makes more or less sense now. Alien Queen. Shush! Die Hard. I know I'm the only one with good parents, though. Mind meld. I have 2 dads. Die Hard. What? Fucking elbows. Hiroshima whispers ultra manly. Kermit. One of my parents is non-binary. Die Hard. What? Kiklian. You know what's a loot clear? Octopus. You? Kiklian. Uncertain. Ask again later. Octopus. Magic 8-ball response. Valid. Yao Mamo. What's a little queer, Hagagare-chan? Kekleon. Well, on the note of families, sometimes a family is 20 hero students, a skeleton uncle, a loud uncle, a BDSM aunt, and a hobo dad. Die Hard. What? Boss, I'm not your father, Hagagare. Kekleon. And yet you knew exactly who I was talking about. Boss, you're all insufferable gremlin children. Yo, Mamo, frowny face. Boss, House Rule 12, Yo, Yorozu is exempt. Yo, Mamo, smile face. Funky elbows. Not sure if it's queer exactly, but my dad and moms are poly. Die Hard. What? Mr. Murder. Die Hard. Question mark. Funky elbows. Bakugo, you good? Mr. Murder. That's an option. I didn't realize that was an option. Funky elbows. What, being poly? Mr. Murder. Yeah. Boss. Oh, kid, you've got a lot to learn. Funky elbows. Yeah, man. It's still a little stigmatized, but if a guy can like a guy, why can't he like 2? Or a guy and a gal, or 2 girls? Alien Queen. ¿Por qué los dos? Mr. Murder. Ah. Small bean. Gotcha, I'm literally dating 2 people. Mr. Murder. Yeah, but they're both guys. I guess I didn't realize you could date a guy and a girl, or more, or whatever. Punk Butch. Kiri, I think Sarah broke your boyfriend? Die Hard. He does, in fact, have his thinking face on. But what, Bakugo? I'm gonna make sure he's Gucci, so I'm gonna yeet out of here real quick. Boss, please try to unbreak my student with minimal property damage. Kiri. Yeah. Small bean. Can we get an F in the chat for blowing Kanchan's mind? Yeah, Momo. F. Large boy. F. Edgy. F. Defying gravity. F. Boss. F. 2303. Pikachu. Wait, blowing his mind, Midoriya, you fucking little... Fucking never. Yo, cool down, bro. Pikachu. What? It's hard to see bags under someone's eyes when their entire face is onyx and covered with feathers, but Tokoyami was flipping a metaphorical and literal bird to logic because the ones under his eyes were so heavy you'd have to check them before flying. Seeing weariness on his students' faces was normal to a certain extent. With Ida or Bakugo, it was usually alarming, considering both had strict sleep schedules and the latter would sooner eat his own foot than admit weakness, or in other words, admit weariness. With Midoriya or Kirishima, it wasn't too alarming to see every once in a while. Both were prone to losing track of time on hero forums, and wasn't that fun figuring out his students' usernames on our heroes, even if he hadn't tried to, just because they knew them so well, and Hisashi was prone to sending Shota interesting posts, which meant that occasionally they'd look up to Aizawa glaring at them, sitting on the common room couch and scrolling through at 3 a.m., occasionally with homework still to do. A few, like Shinso, were prone to more sleepless nights than the rest of their peers, enough to warrant an unofficial pass to wander the common areas at night to dispel nervous energy if they found themselves unable to sleep. Thinking back on it, Aizawa remembered Tokoyami once mentioning offhandedly that he still had to sleep with some lights on at night, lest Dark Shadow become unruly while he slept. But other than that, nothing about the boy's sleep habits had particularly stuck out to Shota until now. Now, it looked like the boy was ready to keel over any second. In fact, Aizawa was surprised he hadn't done so already. It was a low-stakes free period for training, and Tokoyami was up against Kirishima in a friendly spar in one corner of the gym closest to the dorms. The shorter boy's movements were sluggish, as if he were trying to drag his limbs through mud, and even Dark Shadow seemed to have its eyes half closed the entire time the pair was going at it. Kirishima, noticing this, was going easy, which Aizawa understood but did not approve of. Once yet another round had ended with Kirishima pinning Tokoyami to the ground, Shota began to walk over to the two students as they sipped at their water bottles and had a, mostly one-sided, conversation. The boys turned to their teacher once they noticed him, and Aizawa simply crossed his arms and raised a single eyebrow at them both. "Sensei?" Kirishima asked hesitantly, likely grasping why Shota had come over but not wanting to embarrass his classmate by pointing it at himself. "Do you think villains will go easy if you're chasing them after a long night?" Shota asked by way of a response and saw Tokoyami's slight flinch and Kirishima's guilty look. They knew from experience that villains never went easy, and so the question was obviously rhetorical. "No, Sensei." Tokoyami mumbled as a response anyway, Dark Shadow looking away from the pro-hero tiredly. Shota nodded before continuing. "Kirishima, while it's good to know your opponent's limits and withhold excessive strength in a spar against classmates, this exercise won't do you any good if you're not being pushed to your limits as well." Tokoyami once again looked down in embarrassment, and Kirishima looked for a moment as if he wanted to speak up in the other boy's defense. After a moment of silence between the three of them, Shota sighed and rubbed the stubble on his chin with the palm of his hand, fighting a groan. "So then," he prompted. "Is there something I should know, Tokoyami? Did you procrastinate Midnight's essay till 3 in the morning last night or something?" Shota found himself mildly impressed that his pupil could still manage to push an expression of irritation onto his face past the obvious weariness that lay there, and Dark Shadow made an irritating sort of chuffing sound as Tokoyami rolled his eyes. "I don't know why I expected him to get that paperwork in within a week." Tokoyami grumbled to himself, earning a sympathetic pat on the back from Kirishima and another raised eyebrow from Shota before continuing.
You know how a lot of our internship slots fall on Friday nights?
Tokoyami asked wearily, and Shota nodded. Friday nights were relatively rowdy in terms of villain activity, and a good time for students to get some experience in the field under an watchful eye.
Well, Hawks and I got called in to apprehend this man who was trying to break into a jewelry store past a bunch of pretty much useless security guards. We weren't sure what his quirk was or how he might have used it against them until recently. The villain was almost suspiciously easy to apprehend, but as the police took him off, he mentioned something about how we'd be suffering for it in a few days.
Tokoyami sighed and blinked hard, the effort of reopening his eyes appearing Herculean in effort. Fuckgum and I were in the area and were able to help. Kirishima took over the story from Tokoyami, who shot him a grateful look through his exhaustion, and Shota realized that if Kirishima knew what was going on, then the decision for the two boys to spar against each other that period was likely intentional, as the red-haired boy would know about whatever this situation was. We came in towards the end of the fight, so Hawks and Tokoyami mostly had everything covered. But the next day, when I came to Fatgum's office to drop off some paperwork, he mentioned what they'd figured out the villain's quirk was.
He calls it Walking Dead, and it seems pretty dramatic if you haven't experienced it.
Tokoyami supplied, wiping the corner of his eyes with the back of his hand.
He activates it by putting both hands on you at the same time, and since Hawks and I mostly had it handled by the time Kirishima and Fatgum got there, we were the only two hit. It enables him to take away a person's ability to sleep for a period of time, and it compounds with exhaustion, predictably. After 2 days with no sleep, it essentially makes you feel like you've gone forward instead.
Shota took a mental note of the date and flinched. It was about Monday, about mid-morning, which meant that Tokoyami had been up all weekend and then some, but that the villain's quirk had made it seem more like 4 or 5 days straight with no rest for his students. As someone who worked 2 full-time jobs pretty much all hours of the day on top of taking care of 20 rowdy teenagers, Shota could relate to how badly a lack of sleep could throw someone off their rhythm, especially if they weren't used to it. And Tokoyami definitely did not look used to it.
I assume that's why you found the security guards practically useless.
Shota asked, and Tokoyami nodded.
The villain had done some investigation and used his quirk on them a few days beforehand. By the time they got to work that night, they were practically dead on their feet.
The boy supplied. Thinking over this new information, Shota hummed.
And how long does the quirk last?
At this, Tokoyami deflated even further, hunched so far forward it was surprising he hadn't yet fallen over. Kirishima looked at his friend and settled a sympathetic hand on his shoulder before responding for him. It seems to vary randomly from person to person, Kirishima admitted. But by the earliest estimates, it could end anywhere from sometime today to 2 days from now. This time, Aizawa let his grimace show outwardly because at that point, the kid would be running on what was effectively over a week of no sleep, and if Tokoyami looked down on his feet now, then he definitely wasn't going to be able to do anything but lie in bed after tonight, should the quirk last any longer.
Yeah,
Tokoyami deadpanned upon seeing his teacher's sympathetic face.
I know. Why wasn't I made aware of this?
Shota asked after a moment, irritated at the distinct lack of internship incident report forms he'd received.
Like I said, Sensei,
Tokoyami responded dryly, any trace of humor gone from his voice.
I don't know why I expected him to get those forms in a timely manner.
A sharp lens of annoyance shot through Shota, and he frowned in agreement with his pupil. Hawks, despite being the number 2 hero at this point, was infamous for his lack of responsibility when it came to paperwork, and if he'd gotten hit with the same quirk Tokoyami had, he'd be even less inclined to fill out any kind of form. Even if that form is relevant to ensuring my students have the capacity to attend their education after getting hit with a quirk during an internship, Shota mused in irritation.
Yes, I'll admit that Hawks is rather notorious for not filling out the papers he should.
Shota responded flatly and couldn't help a small upward twitch at the corners of his mouth as Tokoyami practically snorted in agreement, and Kirishima bit back a laugh.
In the future, if anything in your internship poses a threat to your academic career, please let me know as soon as possible, since it seems our number 2 hero isn't likely to do so. Yes, Sensei.
Tokoyami conceded easily, and Shota was unsettled to realize he could see the boy swaying on his feet.
Since nothing good will come of exhausting yourself further, you might as well sit out on all physical activities for the rest of the day.
Shota sighed, and Tokoyami shot him a weary look of gratitude.
Kirishima, go and fill in as Shoji's sparring partner until Kaminari regains his senses again, please.
Yes, sir, Sensei, sir. Kirishima beamed, sending Tokoyami a friendly wave before running over to remove his brain-fried friend from his match against his peer. As they watched the cheerful boy run off, Shota put a gentle hand on Tokoyami's shoulder and began steering him towards one of the gym walls, motioning for him to sit down before pointedly putting his packaged-up sleeping bag on the ground next to his pupil and walking away. Shota was lucky, he figured, that Tokoyami was just as adept at receiving nonverbal communication as he was at giving it. It meant that Shota didn't have to embarrass either one of them with what was obviously an invitation that the bro hero would never have even considered giving any of his students for previous years. Even more fortunately, it meant that when Shota looked back over his shoulder 15 minutes later from correcting Sero's stance, Tokoyami had propped his head against the bundled-up sleeping bag sandwiched between his head and his shoulder, and after another 30 minutes, he'd miraculously been able to fall asleep for the first time in days. Small mercies, Shota supposed. When class ended, he told Ida and Yaoyorozu to lead their classmates back to the changing rooms and then midnight's art history lecture, a command received emphatically and enthusiastically, and Shota wasn't sure when the younger Ida he'd practically watched grow up had begun to salute him. But if the expression by Yaoyorozu's face was anything to go by, Shota wasn't the only one amused by the boy's antics. Sensei? Yaoyorozu asked a moment after Ida's hands had swiftly cut through the air on the way down from his odd salute. What would you like us to do about Tokoyami? Ida, who had apparently not noticed their classmate dozing in the corner of the room, finally locked onto the boy in question and gawked indignantly. Sensei! Ida boomed, and Shota fought the urge to wince. My deepest apologies for Tokoyami-kun's disrespect during this instructional period. It's highly unprofessional. Shota cut him off here, grabbing Ida's arm gently as the boy made to go wake Tokoyami up. Ida stopped speaking and looked at him in confusion before his teacher simply shook his head.
There are extenuating circumstances,
Shota simply said, and Ida's affronted look at catching his classmate dozing off in class was wiped clean and replaced with a simple one of acceptance as the boy nodded. Would you like us to let him rest here, then? Ida proposed, and then gave a small frown. I imagine he would be quite disoriented if he came to, and none of us were here, not to mention the security risk it poses. Since our class seems to be a constant target of villain attacks and other kinds of catastrophe, Ida didn't say, but Shota heard it anyway, and fought off a feeling of guilt Hisashi and Nomori and his therapist, and pretty much anyone who knew him told him was misplaced.
I'll be taking him back to the dorms in just a second.
Shota simply answered instead, and the class reps nodded in understanding before beginning to corral their peers towards the locker rooms and showers that many of them desperately needed, considering more than one of them secreted unusual and often toxic substances from their very pores as a part of their quirks. Walking over to where Tokoyami sat slouched against the wall, Aizawa crouched down slowly and gently began to shake his student awake. As loath as he was to rouse his student so soon after he'd finally managed to go to sleep, Shota was sure Tokoyami would be just as embarrassed at being carried bridal style to the dorms as Shota would be to have to do it. Tokoyami gurgled incomprehensibly. Lifting his neck off the makeshift pillow Shota's sleeping bag bundle had made just enough for it to fall to the ground, and then promptly be whisked into one of the many pockets in Aizawa's black cargo pants.
What? Sparring period is over,
Shota said simply, standing up and extending a hand to help the boy do the same.
It seems that villain's quirk is finally worn off. So let's get you to the dorms and back to bed.
Were Tokoyami any more lucid and any less weary, Shota wouldn't have been surprised if his pupil had insisted that he was fine and tried to go change for his next class. As it was, however, Shota would be surprised if Tokoyami knew what year it was, and the boy settled for pushing himself to his feet with the help of his homeroom teacher. Arms slung awkwardly around shoulders to make sure Tokoyami didn't pass out right there on the way to the dorm building. Shota wondered how much shorter his student would have to be for this to be impossible at all. The pair got halfway to the dorms, receiving concerned but cheerful waves from the rest of 1A as they left the gym before Tokoyami's legs appeared to give out completely. Shota managed to catch his student on the way down, but when he tried to usher the boy back to his feet, Tokoyami simply moaned.
"Come on, kid. Can you stand?"
Shota murmured a bit gruffly, and the groan that came in response he figured was a no. Sighing, Shota thought for a moment before getting in front of Tokoyami and crouching down a bit.
"I'm not going to carry you bridal style, kid. I already get enough teasing about that from Misashi. The one time the rest of you gremlins decided to snap a picture when Ashido fell asleep on me. If you can't walk, then hop on."
Tokoyami did eventually get on Shota's back, though the pro hero was more inclined to say the boy fell forward on to his back, as opposed to hopping on to it. With a snort of amusement so small only he could hear it, Shota slowly rose up, shifting Tokoyami's seat on his arms behind his back to make sure the borderline unconscious student he was carrying wouldn't slide right off the moment he began walking. Feeling relatively assured that his pupil wouldn't hit the ground, Shota began the rest of the trip back to the dorms, fumbling for his key card to the front entrance and taking the elevator up as opposed to trying to knock Tokoyami's head against the stairwell ceiling. Somehow he didn't think his student would appreciate waking up with a bump on his head that stuck out past his feathers. With no one else around to witness it, Shota smiled a little at the thought as he unlocked the door to Tokoyami's room and promptly bit back a groan. Like with the rest of his class, he'd heard rumors about everyone's decorating style. He just supposed he didn't quite expect the rumors about gargoyles in Tokoyami's room to be true. Or at least not quite as unsettling as they were rumored to be. Shaking his head in a mixture of amusement and exasperation, Shota walked over to the boy's bed and turned his back to it, lowering Tokoyami down onto the mattress as gently as he could. Once his student was safely flopped onto the mattress, Shota pulled the boy's shoes off and the covers up, and that, he told himself, was all he was going to do. On the way out the door, however, Shota frowned in thought. The light coming in from the boy's window was rather blinding and shifting right across Tokoyami's eyes. If anything, he reasoned, his student deserved a good rest after the exhaustion he'd been subjected to the entire weekend and half of the school day. And it was with that thought that Shota crossed the room and pulled the blinds shut, plunging the room into near darkness. Suddenly sensing a presence behind him, Shota looked over his shoulder, not to find Tokoyami awake, but Dark Shadow growing larger and beginning to smile almost a little maliciously. In response, Shota opened the blinds just a little more and searched around the room. The sunlight, he realized, would be well and good during the day, but judging by Tokoyami's level of exhaustion, he'd be out all night and well into tomorrow, and Dark Shadow got a little too happy for Shota's liking when the complete darkness of night fell. Shota tried not to think about the stories he'd heard about his student's quirk going wild in the depths of the forest when villains had attacked 1A's summer camp, and gave a small sigh of relief when he found a small light plugged into an outlet on the opposite side of the room. Crossing over to it, Shota went to flip the little switch before pausing and smiling. Much as Tokoyami would probably cringe to deem it as such, this was definitely a nightlight. Not that Shota could blame him for being afraid of the dark, if he was, considering the demon residing within him grew stronger in it. It was the design, however, that caught Shota's eye. The design of the nightlight cover looked like it was separate from the original light, a clear separation visible between the outlet, switch, and bulb portion, and the glass cover that went over it. The cover, Shota realized with a small snicker, that looked very much like a Yaoyorozu-style creation made in a chibi shape of Dark Shadow giving two thumbs feathers? Up. Dark Shadow, who'd apparently been watching Shota ever since he'd come out, chirped in enthused agreement with Shota's revelation, and upon turning around, the pro-hero realized the shadow demon was actually puffing up a little with pride. Well, Shota thought to himself with a small smile and a shake of his head as he switched the nightlight on and shut the door to the room behind him with a small click. I suppose I really shouldn't be surprised anymore with this class. There's something about being in your last year of school that just made you want to do dumb crap. Or at least that's what Aizawa had determined from the amount of third years he'd caught trying to sneak out of their dorms in the past 2 months alone. Honestly, Shota didn't understand it. For first years in heroics, the dormitories were all but mandatory, considering how targeted the students in both classes had been shown to be. It was a matter of safety, despite what some of the more critical newspapers and parents had to say about UA's apparent lack of concern on the matter, considering that such targeting had been able to happen at all. Ignoring those criticisms that made Shota's blood boil and eyes sting and elbow burn, the issue at hand was how the third-year heroics students had kept trying to sneak out of their dorms. Kids who hadn't been required to live on campus at all, but who almost unanimously decided to take the offer out of a combination of the opportunities that living on campus provided to further training, as well as some form of teenage rebellion jumping at the opportunity to get away from their parents. So, sure, considering this last point, Shota could see where some streak of teenage rebellion and cabin fever might prompt a few midnight wanderings, but this was the 4th time this month he'd caught a student trying to physically scale the walls around UA's campus while he was on patrol. A fair amount of students, mostly first years, had complained about the dorms, the new style of living, the restrictions that came with the whole situation, and other miscellaneous aspects that made themselves known after moving. While Shota could admit that being uprooted from living with your parents 3 years earlier than expected was jarring, and certainly warranted a few complaints, it was a dry joke among the teachers that the students had the easy end of the bargain. After all, almost all the teachers at UA, heroics department teachers especially, had already worked 2 jobs prior to Heights Alliance's construction, balancing pro-hero work with the arguably harder and more stressful responsibility of molding society's up-and-coming heroes of the next generation. Some, like Present Mike with his radio show, had even more responsibilities than that. So Shota didn't feel too bad ripping into third-year students who should know better than to almost set off UA's alarms with a late-night escapade, all things considered. If Shota could do a night shift patrolling some of the seedier areas of the city after spending 7 hours grading essays and working out visitation hours between his first years and their parents, and then work a 4-hour patrol around the dorms to make sure nothing was amiss, then he couldn't really be faulted for making his disappointment known to this third year, who should not only know better, but act better, considering that their every move would be watched by society as soon as they made it onto the pro scene the very next year. It had been a stressful day, and if Shota might have taken some kind of satisfaction or amusement from one of Mirio's classmates trying to stutter out some combination of excuse and apology in front of him 5 feet from where Shota's capture weapon had pulled the boy down from attempting to scale UA's walls not 3 minutes prior, who could blame him? Then again, it had been a stressful day, and if the past year had taught Shota anything, it was that days like this only tended to get worse before they got better. Read ended. With this in mind, the subtle boomf that came from the direction of 1A's dorm building and shook the air ever so slightly shouldn't have come as much of a surprise.
Look, just stop.
Shota finally interrupted the blubbering third year, running a weary hand down his face as he sighed.
I normally assume you have the common sense by this point in your education to figure out what you did wrong, but if you did, then you probably wouldn't have tried this stunt in the first place, so let me condense it for you.
The third-year boy in front of him slowly grew red in the face as Shota continued, the flush creeping down the back of his neck.
1. You decided to try and leave campus for a Doritos craving at 2 in the morning. despite the advanced calculus exam I know Ectoplasm has scheduled for your class first period today, whatever. 2. You decided your escape attempt was worth nearly setting off the campus perimeter alarms. And 3.
Shota glared down at the now thoroughly chastised student in front of him.
Despite 3 years at one of the most prestigious hero schools in the world, you got caught doing it.
The boy in front of him was positively wilting now, and Shota gave one more weary sigh before looking back over his shoulder at the direction of his class's dorm building.
I'll be having a discussion with your homeroom teacher in the morning, but for now, I have other matters to attend to. I trust you'll return directly to your dorm, because I'll know otherwise, and I'd like to think you're too old to need me to escort you back myself.
With a final miserable nod, the third-year student started hurrying sullenly back in the direction of his own dorm building, disappearing around a corner right as Shota turned and began walking back toward his own class's building. His pace was brisk, the way the air had shuddered ever so slightly a few moments before replaying in his mind, only to be interrupted by slight buzzing from his phone. Sliding it into his pocket and around his cell, Shota brought it out and unlocked it, turning into a jog as he saw the chat title the notification belonged to. Problem Children. Group Chat. 217. Edgy.
Should I be concerned?
Mind meld.
Yeah, what's up?
Punk Butch. I'm not at all surprised the 2 resident insomniacs are up, but yeah, felt the floor shake. Everything okay? Shota picked up the pace just a bit more, rounding a corner and frowning as another message came in. Nyong! Everything is under control. Please go back to bed. Punk Butch. Okay, but what's up? Nyong! It's simply a personal matter. Rest assured it's being taken care of. Punk Butch. That sounds suspicious, but I'm pretty tired, so I'll trust you and go back to sleep. Let me know if you need any help. Nyong! I doubt that will be necessary, but I appreciate the offer. Please do get some rest. Shota was undeniably running at this point, concerned slightly assuaged by Ida's somewhat stamp of approval, but knowing this class, things were never quite that simple. Opening up a separate chat, Shota typed out a message to his coworkers in case his gut was correct, and his night was about to become even longer. The adults, ? Group chat. Chat includes minus 5-hour energy, Eraserhead, Yow Mate, All Might, Brick House, Cementos, King Shamer, Midnight, Green, Ectoplasm, Yeet, Present Mike, and God. There's you. 223. Minus 5-hour energy.
My class is being troublesome again. Might be nothing, but can someone cover the rest of my shift just in case? Ends of 4.
Yeet. You're two things, shut up, buddy, up, I got you. Leave it up to me, homie.
5-hour energy. Izashi, no. Anyone awake who hasn't already been up for 2.5 days. Yeet. Brick House. I can cover. I just finished grading some essays, and after that hot mess, I'm not sure I'll be able to sleep for the rest of the night anyway. Good luck with your class. Let us know if you need help.
Yeet. Yep.
Minus 5-hour energy. Will do. Thanks.
Again, Shota thought. Almost prayed. It might be nothing. But, knowing his students, Shota didn't slow down even as the front door of the dormitories came into view. The front door leading into the common area stopped just short of being thrown against the doorstop, Shota remembering at the last second to try and keep down the noise for any students who might have managed to sleep through whatever had happened a few minutes prior. Glad that at least whatever had happened hadn't occurred in the living room when the students were supposed to be in their rooms and ideally asleep. Shota immediately headed for the stairs, taking 2 at a time and popping out on the second floor just long enough to see some light peeking under Tokoyami's and Itoshi's doors before heading back to the stairs and ascending to the 3rd floor in his quest for the issue. The 3rd floor likewise yielded no results, the only thing out of place being Ida's door cracked slightly open. The boy had likely forgotten to close it all the way in his rush to investigate, or else hadn't bothered grabbing his room key on the way out, so Shota left it as it was and ascended the stairs one more time. Shota had barely left the stairway before a dash of blue appeared in his vision, and he found himself nearly running into 1A's president in his haste to find the source of whatever had happened. There's nothing to worry about. Please go back to... Oh, Aizawa-sensei! Ida stammered, cut off halfway through what was likely meant to be reassurances to any of his classmates coming to investigate themselves.
What happened?
Shota asked briskly, taking in his student's disheveled appearance, Ida's usually neatly combed hair mussed with sleep, glasses askew on his face, and shivering slightly in his matching silk pajamas. Seriously, sometimes Shota might have wondered if his student was an 80-year-old in disguise, had he not had to babysit the kid every once in a while when he went over to Tensei's place to study during their own time at UA. It's... Ida trailed off in a search for words, though his gaze told Shota everything the man needed to know as it settled on the slightly ajar door to Bakugo's room, behind him. I wasn't quite sure what to do, since it seemed rather personal, Ida admitted in a somewhat resigned murmur. I wanted to contact you, he admitted, toying with the phone in his hands, but Bakugo didn't want...
I've got it from here,
Shota assured his student, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder briefly.
You just stay out here and make sure no one else comes in,
Shota asked, starting to head towards Bakugo's door. Yes, Sensei! Ida nodded with vigor, evidently relieved to have the situation taken out of his hands, but still have something useful to do. Muffled sounds of distress became audible as Shota approached Bakugo's door, and without stopping to think that maybe a more gentle approach would be helpful for once, Shota swung the door to the boy's room open, just in time to dodge the weak, startled blast that came from his student sitting up against his bed in the corner of his room. In some corner of his mind, Shota mused that he'd never heard of the results of Bakugo's room when the kids had toured each other's setups when everyone up first moving into the Heights Alliance. From what he'd overheard, Bakugo's had been one of the few rooms no one had seen, as the boy had gone to bed early and refused to participate in the room judging at all. Looking at the shaking sheet-white boy with his back pressed against his bed now, Shota grimly wondered if Bakugo had always gone to bed early, or if he'd only started once these nightmares started robbing him of sleep during the normal hours of the night. The explosive boy was trembling slightly, knees pulled up against his chest with Kirishima and Uraraka on either side of him, both murmuring in hushed tones to try and get him to calm down. Bakugo's eyes were red with a mixture of sleep and unshed tears, and as Uraraka gently grabbed Bakugo's still outstretched hand, he seemed to realize what he'd just done, jerking the hand back to his side and wiping his sweaty palm on what must have been what Shota hoped were simple, non-flammable pajamas, a t-shirt and loose shorts. Fuck, sorry, Bakugo swore under his breath, continuing to wipe off his palms on his pajamas almost obsessively, not that Shota could blame him. On top of secreting one of the most flammable substances known to man in his sleep, his student had just instinctively almost attacked his own teacher. Hey, bro, don't worry about it. It's fine. Kirishima tried to soothe him, eyes flitting nervously up to Shota for a second, as if to make sure their teacher wasn't actually mad after all.
That's my fault. I should have knocked first,
Shota agreed, approaching the trio slowly before lowering himself down to the ground in front of them. Kirishima let his attention be drawn back to Bakugo again, and the pro-hero simply sat there silently as Bakugo let his classmates try and calm him down. A slight creak from the door leading to Bakugo's bathroom had Shota look up to find Todoroki walk into the room, the telltale click of ice muffled by the hand towel it was wrapped in. Bakugo snarled at the other boy, who simply held one hand up in a sort of surrender before passing the improvised cold press to Uraraka and walking out the door with nothing more than a simple wave. Shota looked back to Uraraka, curious, only to see Bakugo swipe the ice pack from her angrily and hold it through his left forearm. Ah, Shota thought dryly as he realized. Seems even non-flammable pajamas can't stop someone from using their quirk on themselves in their sleep accidentally. A minute or so passed of Bakugo silently icing his mild burns, the silence almost daring Shota to say something before he finally spoke up.
Why are you here? I typically investigate when my class's door building hits above a 5 on the Richter scale,
Shota answered dryly. With some students, it might be better to play it slow and reassuring, but Bakugo was never one to appreciate platitudes or pity, something Shota could relate to himself. Fuck! Bakugo reiterated, scowling and scrubbing at his eyes viciously with his fist.
You can go back to whatever you were doing, alright?
He mumbled angrily. I'm fine. A few seconds passed with Bakugo staring at the rug in front of him as if it had personally offended him before Shota's student looked up to meet his dry look, one eyebrow lifted and head tilted pointedly towards the scuffed wall next to the boy's bed that had, by the looks of it, been on the receiving end of the boy's quirk a short while prior, if the smell of scorched drywall was anything to go by. "Fuck off!" Bakugo bit out through bare teeth, and Kirishima's nervously furrowed eyebrows echoed the sentiment that Ida could be heard sputtering wordlessly from the hall where the exclamation had obviously made its way out to. "No," Shota simply responded, almost bored, crossing his arms loosely to show he wasn't going anywhere. Bakugo grew even more red in the face, and Uraraka opened and closed her hands nervously beside him, searching for something to do to help. After another moment, Bakugo fell back against his bed frame with a thump that sounded vaguely painful, and he huffed a breath out through his nostrils before looking away. "Fine," he muttered under his breath almost venomously as he shifted the ice pack on his arm. "Stay here or do whatever the fuck you want, but I'm not talking." "I never asked you to, Bakugo," Shota pointed out, earning a surprised look from all three of his students, an extra bit of wariness also present in Bakugo's suspicious glare as he continued. "I think you know at this point what works and what doesn't work for you to manage things that upset you. I'm not going to force you to do anything that you don't think would help. I'm a little surprised that you think I would." Bakugo's brow furrowed, and as he thought this over, Shota was distantly glad that Cementos had taken over the rest of his dorm patrol shift. "This might take a while." "Then why are you just sitting there?" Bakugo managed to get past the storm of thoughts, questions, and likely expletives flying through his brain. "If you're not going to make me talk, what are you going to make me do?" Aizawa abandoned his student. "Bakugo," he said flatly, and that was enough for the boy to get the message. "I don't know!" he snarled in response, defensive again as he threw his hands up in the air in frustration, the towel rattling with the soft clink of muffled and melting ice. "You could go back to sleep or grade papers or whatever else the fuck you were doing." Shota weighed his next words carefully, aware of the negative response, any implication that Bakugo had friends, and that those friends helped him, might have on the tense moment. "So could Uraraka and Kirishima." Shota nodded to the students pointedly, both of whom shot him an almost betrayed look, though Kirishima's held a bit of a challenge to it, and Uraraka's was more than a bit irritated. Both things that were assuaged as Shota continued. "But they're still here, which means that just sitting here, not making you talk, helps." Bakugo snorted angrily, and Shota closed his eyes and prayed for patience. "Am I wrong?" "No!" Bakugo spat out the word almost as if it were a curse, though the formerly unnoticed tension residing in his friends' shoulders as they sat on either side of him melted away just a little at any slight confirmation they were indeed helping in whatever way. "If you really want me to go, I can leave you all be," Shota said quietly after a moment of frustrated silence on Bakugo's part. "I can go and ward off anyone who comes to investigate, though I think Ida is probably grateful for something to do. Fucking Four Eyes couldn't even stop Tentacles and Icy Hot from barging in here." Bakugo bit out scathingly, though Shota couldn't help but notice the words themselves held remarkably less bite than he'd expect them to. "Todoroki literally sleeps in the room above you, Bakugo," Kirishima pointed out, holding his hands up defensively when his friend rounded a glare on him. "I'm just stating a fact. Of course he'd probably wake up. Almost everyone on the floor did, and so did Ida." "And Ida's right below you," Uraraka agreed, tactfully ignoring Bakugo's face reddening once again. "And Shojin-kun admitted the other day that he started sleeping with ears at the ends of his tentacle thingies." Uraraka continued, blushing a bit for lack of better terminology. "Koda's rabbit probably wakes him up sometimes." Bakugo grumbled under his breath unhappily, and after doing a quick mental check of all the people whose rooms were above, below, or on the same floor as Bakugo's, Shota frowned almost imperceptibly. "Shido?" he asked, though internally he was grateful the girl wasn't there after all. From what Shota had been able to see, living in the same building had made the girl even more excitable when it came to her classmates and occasionally disrespecting their privacy, and Shota couldn't imagine Bakugo would take her fussing and boisterous personality particularly well right now, frazzled as he seemed to be. What Shota wasn't expecting was for Bakugo to snort out a clipped laugh in response to the easy question. Please, Bakugo, stop. You've seen what she's like once she's asleep. A fucking nuclear war wouldn't wake her up. True, Shota mused to himself as memories of having to carry the girl up to her room at night after she fell asleep on him or the common couch or both came to mind unbidden. I'm not quite sure how she manages to get up in time for class, to be honest, Uraraka agreed with a hesitant grin that grew emboldened by the smirk it brought to Bakugo's face. She doesn't, Shota responded flatly, bringing to mind all the times Ashido had stumbled into class and sat down mere seconds before the starting bell rang, much to Ida's constant consternation, and eliciting a small laugh from the 3 students in front of him. It felt like a small victory, even as their laughter quieted and morphed into uncertain silence. After a moment of thought, Shota nodded towards Bakugo's forearm and the half-melted towel of ice, now dripping onto the carpet, that covered it. I'd like you to see Recovery Girl tomorrow, before class starts, he said simply, and it seemed to reignite some of the rebellious fire in Bakugo as he shook his head angrily. Don't argue with me on this. Shota cut his student off as Bakugo opened his mouth to give some kind of retort to the previous command. It might be minor, but there's no reason you should have to deal with it at all. It was an accident, which means Recovery Girl won't mind, and I don't want the long sleeves of your uniform irritating it unnecessarily. Bakugo set his face in something dangerously close to a pout before nodding almost imperceptibly, and it was a testament to Kirishima and Uraraka's poker faces that their surprise at their friend's easy, for him, acquiescence went virtually undetected. A comfortable silence settled over the 4 of them before it was broken astonishingly by Bakugo's quiet admittance of, I was back in the fucking bar. Shota's eyes found Bakugo's, though the boy quickly averted his gaze as he continued. I was back in that fucking bar, and they had that towel wrapped around my fucking hands, the one that they soaked with. Bakugo flinched and for once didn't jerk away from the patient hand Uraraka laid on the boy's shoulder, choosing instead to almost lean into it. He looked like he wanted nothing more than to lay his head against her shoulder and just go to sleep right there, but whatever remained of his pride was likely protesting the idea. Shota hated the haunted look in his students' eyes in that moment. They all knew which bar Bakugo was talking about, of course. The business front that the League of Villains had kept him in for 2 days after the raid on the summer camp. Upon visiting the hospital to check on his student after the battle had ended, Shota had found Bakugo's hands wrapped up in gauze, still tender for a day or 2 even after Recovery Girl's healing had done what it could. Shota hadn't wanted to press Bakugo at the time, not after all he'd just been through, and later discovered through Nezu's grim admittance that the League of Villains had periodically wrapped Bakugo's hands in a towel doused with sodium hydroxide. The caustic alkali had neutralized the boy's nitroglycerin sweat to make sure he couldn't direct explosions with his hands, and without his palms to set a spark, Bakugo's escape capabilities had been drastically reduced. The League's research on substances that could essentially neutralize Bakugo's quirk was probably the main reason he hadn't escaped within a few hours of being captured. As it was, sodium hydroxide wasn't easy on the skin for short periods of time, much less the 2 days the League had routinely doused his hands for. The nitroglycerin excreted by Bakugo's sweat glands was probably one of the few saving graces for the boy in the end. His skin had become adept at handling highly toxic substances for long periods of time with little to no permanent damage, which meant the sodium hydroxide hadn't led to any long-term side effects other than some scarring on the boy's hands that could just as easily be attributed to the quirk he was born with. From the whispered conversations between Bakugo's nurses when the boy had been asleep in the hospital bed, however, Shota had grimly learned that the fact his student had been able to blast his way to rescue when the time came was nothing short of a miracle, as was the fact there seemed to be no lasting damage to the boy's quirk. Not for the first time, Shota lamented that he couldn't get his hands on Shigaraki himself, because that went so well for you last time, a bitter, ugly part of himself thought. but he shoved it back into the pit where it belonged and refocused on his student sitting in front of him, gripping what used to be a towel of ice to his forearm a little too tightly. Shota reached across slowly, wary of startling Bakugo, and carefully loosened the boy's fingers around the towel. Bakugo complied with little more than a scowl, and Kirishima took the wet, now iceless towel from him and stood up before stepping into the bathroom connected to the room. From the splashing sounds in the sink and faint rustle of what Shota assumed would be a shower curtain, Kirishima likely wrung the towel out and hung it to dry on the shower rod before re-entering the room and sitting down next to Bakugo once more as the boy took a deep breath and continued. "No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get free." Bakugo grit out before sending a scathing look at his slightly burned forearm. "I'm kinda surprised it wasn't worse," he added almost as an afterthought, his friends both grimacing at the morbidity, but choosing, probably wisely, not to comment. Silence filled the air for a second before Shota turned to Kirishima.
"Would you mind telling Ida he can go back to bed?"
he asked.
"I don't think anyone else is going to come investigate at this point."
Kirishima nodded and stood once more before opening the bedroom door slightly, sliding out into the hall. Muffled conversation could be heard before the sound of footsteps came from the stairwell down the hall, and Kirishima returned, closing the door behind him softly and taking his place at Bakugo's side again once more, almost like a sentry. "Well," Bakugo demanded after a few more moments of silence, sitting up straight and causing Uraraka's hand to fall off his shoulder and back to her lap, where she elected to let it stay. Shota blinked.
"Well, what?"
"Well," Bakugo spluttered, "I don't know."
"I'm not Hound Dog Bakugo,"
Shota replied simply, shrugging his shoulders.
"I'm glad if talking about it helped you, but I'm not really qualified to give you much advice."
"Bullshit!" Bakugo argued heatedly, before pointing an almost accusatory finger at his homeroom teacher, to which Shota simply blinked placidly in response. "How do you get through them?" he demanded. Shota felt his stomach start to drop out from under him.
"Get through what?"
he asked warily, hoping that Bakugo wasn't asking him what he thought he was asking him, and knowing even as he did so that it was in vain.
You know,"
Bakugo muttered, suddenly subdued again.
"the nightmares."
1,000 images flashed through Shota's mind at once, all courtesy of his own mind after hours. Tsuyu's face flaking off underneath Shigaraki's hand, her scream piercing the anticipatory air. Midoriya lying in a hospital bed. Shota never even got to see him, and due to his own injuries at the time, half-conscious and sobbing wildly at the pain in his legs from propelling himself forward to buy All Might some time against the Nomu. His co-worker himself, lying battered and bloody and defeated in the cratered ground of Camino, all for one laughing hysterically above his lifeless body. The fires that broke out during summer training camp, the roaring winds that it brought carrying the agonized screams of his students being burned alive as he raced through the trees unable to find them. Shota schooled his face, though from the hesitant expressions adorning all three of his students' own, he guessed he hadn't done so quite quickly enough to block some of the haunted feelings flitting across his face before he reined back in control.
"Do they ever go away?"
Bakugo whispered hoarsely, and Shota noticed to his chagrin that the boy's eyes were glistening with unshed tears for the second time that night. This time probably at being faced with the prospect that he might have nightmares of his own for the rest of his life. That they might never go away as he hoped. Shota wondered briefly if he should tell the boy the truth.
"Not completely,"
Shota eventually admitted with a defeated, weary sigh, and hated how not only Bakugo's head dropped, but Kirishima and Uraraka's shoulders both slumped as well. Part of him wondered just how many of his students had these kinds of nightmares, and another part of him desperately wanted not to know.
"They get better, though,"
he murmured honestly, and took slight heart in the drops of hope the words seemed to put in his students' eyes.
"Even if you kids hadn't gone through everything you had, pro heroes have to suffer through nightmares. It's just part of the job,"
he admitted, running a hand through his hair and wincing as his fingers caught on a particularly big knot.
"You won't be able to save everyone. You'll wonder if it's your fault. You'll run over scenarios in your head 1,000 different times with 1,000 different ways you could have done things, and sometimes you'll find you could have saved someone if you'd done something differently. That's part of the job.
He continued, his experienced fingers working the knot out in seconds, and then starting to braid a small section of hair. Uraraka watched in quiet, contented amusement the fact that Shota had only started braiding his hair again after the girls of 1A had started bombarding him with hairbrushes and clips and bobby pins and pleases at least once a week, lightly not lost on her. She was more observant than a lot of people gave her credit for, he mused as he finished the small braid in silence and let it drop against his shoulder, his hands finding their place clasped in his lap. "But they get better?" Kirishima now piped up cautiously, almost as if the news were too good to be true.
"They get better,"
Shota stated simply, and in it was a promise. Bakugo hummed in thought, and the four sat there on his bedroom rug for an indeterminate amount of time after that. Every once in a while, one of the kids would jerk awake from the half-developed sleep they'd leaned into, and after Uraraka's third large yawn and Bakugo's fifth guilty glance between his friends who certainly needed the rest, Aizawa sighed and pushed himself to his feet, resolutely ignoring the creaking in his knees, insisting he was getting old. Old as ass, he was only 31.
"Come on,"
Shota grumbled.
"It's time for you three to get to bed. There's class in a few hours, and I'm not excusing you from it."
Kirishima's eyes filled with resignation, and Uraraka simply yawned again as the three kids pushed themselves to their feet as well. Had this been either of them, Shota likely would have at least allowed them to sleep in a bit and skip homeroom. With Bakugo, though, he'd see it as Shota accusing him of some kind of weakness more likely than not, and since no exceptions were made for Bakugo himself, Shota couldn't allow any for Uraraka or Kirishima. Looking at the tired yet supportive faces of the two kids, though, Shota couldn't imagine either of them minded much, or wouldn't do it again in a heartbeat. "Good night, babe," Kirishima murmured and leaned forward towards his boyfriend before realizing his homeroom teacher was leveling him with a somewhat disparaging stare. At that, he chuckled almost nervously and settled for squeezing Bakugo's hand supportingly, and between both, Bakugo blushed through an affectionate scowl. "Sleep well, Bakugo-kun," Uraraka seconded less intimately, sending him a cheery smile that had Bakugo's blush staying where it was on principle.
"Get some fucking sleep, shitty hair, round face,"
Bakugo mumbled. Both of his friends just laughed easily and waved as they left the boys' room, leaving Bakugo and Shota alone.
"I have some paperwork I can do down here if you're worried you'll use your quirk in your sleep again,"
Shota offered after a moment to Bakugo, eyeing the scorch marks on his wall warily. The irony that some of that paperwork would be applying for a maintenance crew to fix the wall wasn't lost on Shota. The comment worked towards the opposite effect of Shota's intent to put Bakugo's mind to rest, and the boy bristled.
"Fuck you, we don't want you in my room watching me while I sleep,"
he insisted, looking at Shota as if he'd lost his mind. "That's fucking weird." "Well, Shota, suppose Bakugo had a point when he put it like that." He'd say Bakugo didn't have to be so prickly about it, but this prickly Bakugo was better than the one that had been shaking on the floor a little over an hour ago. So Shota simply said,
"See yourself,"
and began to walk towards the door. He's halfway through it when Bakugo mumbles something incomprehensible behind him.
"Come again?"
Shota inquires tiredly and looks back to find Bakugo looking at the rug beneath his feet, ears tinged with pink.
"I said thanks."
Bakugo eventually grunts after another moment, and since he's not looking up, Shota allows himself a brief smile before schooling his expression once more.
"I said before, I'm here for you, problem children."
Shota hums over his shoulder as he turns around again. Before he walks through the door, he looks back at Bakugo and holds the boy's eyes for another second, as he allows his own to soften so minutely his student wouldn't notice it if he wasn't paying attention.
"I meant it. I still do."
Shota reassures him after a pause, mouth twitching back up around the edges as he closes Bakugo's door, the soft click echoing softly in the dimly lit and empty hallway. In the silence that followed, Shota could have sworn he heard a muffled huff of something akin to laughter from the room he just left. Shota was a huge fan of personal space, which begged the question, why did he let the gremlins of 1A drag him on a shopping spree through the entire mall? The world may never know, Shota mused dryly to himself as he watched Ashido and Nakagare fawn over a sweater hideous even by his colorblind standards, enthralled with the way the sequins on the shirt could be reversed to switch between cheerful unicorn and a grumpy cat design. Sometimes Shota wasn't sure if he was teaching high schoolers or toddlers. Judging by the baffled look on some of his other students' faces, he wasn't alone. About half the class had come on the spree when Shota had sent the message in the 1A chat that he was going out to grab some necessities of his own, and if anyone needed anything that could be obtained at the mall, they were welcome to come with. While wandering through every store in the mall with 9 teenagers wasn't exactly his idea of a perfect Sunday evening, there had been a slew of tests that week, and he could see from the exhaustion on his students' faces that they needed some kind of break before the new academic week began. Going on a small shopping spree seemed like the kind of thing most of them would probably do if they weren't confined to the dorms, so he'd offered. But when Midoriya's eyes, unsurprisingly, lit up inside the comic store, Ojiro had to put down the bags Hagakare had loaded him with 2 stores ago so his arms wouldn't fall off, and Todoroki's gaze ended up, somewhat surprisingly, locked on the hot topic halfway down the plaza. Shota was starting to regret it. About 2 hours into what Shota was starting to fear was going to be a much longer trip than he'd originally planned, he felt eyes on the back of his head. From his past experience, Shota had found that unless his instincts were seriously telling him something was wrong, it was probably just the discomfort of being recognized in public, something that ideally wouldn't happen as his career as an underground pro hero was based on being unrecognizable and unassuming, but after everything that had happened in the past year and all the spotlight that UA had received, he'd learned to come to terms with it. So Shota originally tried to brush the feeling off, until he saw Midoriya stiffen almost imperceptibly with what was likely the same sensation on the back of his neck. The weight of Shota's phone in his pocket suddenly seemed to multiply tenfold with the memory of the call he'd gotten a few months ago from Sukuuchi saying one of his students had been cornered by Shigaraki in a mall not too different from this one, and Shota fought back both a curse and a sigh as he turned to try and catch the eye of whoever was peeking at the group with the hopes of dissuading them from continuing. He wasn't expecting the prickling feeling on the back of his neck to be coming from a group of girls that didn't look much older than his own students. Shota wasn't sure why the stars glittering in the girls' eyes surprised him, or why he found himself vaguely unsettled at the fervor of their whispers to each other as their gaze darted between a select few of his students. He'd been in this profession for over a decade. He knew how far literal hero worship could go, and this didn't even seem that extreme yet. He supposed it was just a little jarring to have his first years already so visible in the public eye, despite the logic it made after everything from the past year. Midoriya still hadn't relaxed, and Todoroki and Ida were both looking at their boyfriend a little worriedly, his posture rigid and his excited babbling had abruptly dying down. Shota stepped towards his students and put a hand on his shoulder for a second before letting it slide off reassuringly.
"There's just a few fangirls, Midoriya,"
Shota murmured, and Midoriya's eyes found his with a trace of sheepishness for what he probably thought of as paranoia.
"You're safe."
No sooner had his student shot him a look of slight relief than the group of girls started to migrate over towards them, and Shota thought wryly that based on the feverish look in their eyes, he might have spoken a bit too soon. "Excuse me?" came a high-pitched voice from behind them, and Shota braced himself as he and the 3 students with him turned to face the girl who'd spoken. She had feathers sprouting out her neck, and her ears were flattened almost completely against her head. She had piercing green eyes, and Shota blinked upon realizing she had a second pair of eyelids that were half closed, almost like an owl's when sleeping. Upon second thought, her quirk was probably something owl-related, if her physical features and the way she was squinting in the bright plaza was any indication. "May we help you?" Ida, ever the gentleman, inquired politely. Shota noticed with a hint of amusement that he and Todoroki had moved almost imperceptibly in front of Midoriya, who never appeared to be the most gifted with girls on the best of days. See Uraraga occasionally even to this day, despite already having 2 boyfriends. One of the 3 girls in the group, who was about Shota's height and only had 3 fingers on each hand, practically sparkled and fought back a squeal as she interrupted whatever her owl-like friend had been trying to say. "You're Indian!" She grinned. Ida blinked once, thrown off for just a moment by the name, and Shota couldn't really blame him, regardless of how unfortunate it was that Ida's own hero name would take some getting used to after associating it for so long with an older brother instead. "Indian I am," Ida responded after a moment, sliding an easy smile onto his face that Tensei had to have mentioned him on, the similarities between the two of them nearly uncanny for just a moment. "Do you need any assistance?" Shota fought to keep himself from rolling his eyes, leave it to Ida to offer hero assistance with no real prompting or reason to do so, despite being off duty and on a fun outing with his friends. "Oh, no, nothing like that!" The owl-like girl spoke up once more, laughing bashfully and borderline batting her eyelashes at Todoroki, as the 3rd girl in the group who hadn't yet spoken tried to get a good glance at Midoriya, only to look away blushing as soon as he made the barest of eye contact with her.
"I'm afraid if you don't need anything from us, then we'll have to be on our way,"
Shota interrupted boredly, watching with slight amusement as the group of girls started to realize he was there as well. "Oh, of course!" the owl girl said bashfully, readjusting her purse strap on her shoulder before digging around in it, finally procuring a pen and a notepad. "It's fine if you don't have the time," she continued, "but my friend here—" She motioned to the quietest member of their group, who immediately redirected her gaze to her shoes. "Recognized you all, and we were wondering if we could get your autographs." Midoriya and Ida relaxed while Todoroki fought to rein in a prickle of irritation, though Shota doubted anyone who didn't know the boy well would be able to detect it. The 3 students looked over at Shota for permission, which almost made the men laugh.
"You don't need to ask me for permission to give out your autographs."
He sighed long-sufferingly, but not unkindly.
"Now that you all have your provisional hero licenses, you're allowed to sign things. It's just other merchandise you're limited on until you hit your 3rd year."
Come to think of it, Shota mused, production of goods and copyright would make a good lesson to fill the empty spot I have this Wednesday. "And of course," Ida assured the girls upon getting confirmation from Shota, taking the pen and notepad into his hands as he began to sign his name. "And who might we be making these out to?" he inquired politely. I'm Aika," the taller 3-fingered girl exclaimed, watching Ida flawlessly sign his hero name in cursive. "I'm Haru, and this is Kei," the apparent leader of the small group of girls piped up, pointing to herself, and then the shyest of the 3, who mustered up the courage to give a small wave. Shota noticed after another moment that her lips didn't seem able to part just by the looks of them, which likely explained her silence along with her seemingly quiet personality. Ida nodded and wrote a short note underneath his autograph to the 3 girls before handing it off to Midoriya, who began to do the same. By this point, most of Shota's class had wandered over to where the 4 of them were standing, having finished perusing the store they were in, but knowing better than to wander off. Uraraka noticed what was going on and nudged Yaoyorozu and Jiro before pointing with a smile, and both girls gave a small chuckle of their own as they watched Midoriya sign the paper with the utmost concentration, mumbling under his breath as he wrote, and his boyfriends watched him with exasperated fondness. "Make sure they can read it, Midoriya-kun," Ida chastised lightly, and the boy in question flushed. "Well, handwriting isn't that bad!" He nearly squawked in indignation before passing the notebook on to Todoroki, who took it with a muffled snort of laughter and simply signed his name before handing the notepad back to the girls. "Oh my gosh, thank you!" Haru squealed, turning the notebook to show her friends the signatures they'd collected before they turned and started to leave. "I can't believe I got Shoto's autograph!" Shoto flushed as the girls disappeared into the crowd, scowling as Midoriya and Ida laughed at him good-naturedly. Smirking, Shota turned back to the rest of his students, drawing their attention from the video Hagakare was taking of Mina trying to lick Yaoyorozu's elbow without the girl noticing, or being elbowed in the face. "All right," he drawled, ignoring the whine that came from Mina and the slight shriek that came from Yaoyorozu as the former completed the challenge right as Hagakare shifted the camera to Shota on instinct once he started speaking. Ignoring them, he continued.
"Where do we need to go next? Ojiro, have we..." "Excuse me!"
came a gruff voice from behind Shota, and he turned around in irritation to see a large man standing behind him with a disagreeable expression on his face decorated by 5 o'clock shadow that morphed into spikes halfway down his jaw.
May I help you?
Shota responded flatly, not intimidated in the least and slightly amused when the man faltered for just a second because of it.
Yeah!
The man regained his composure, and the anger on his face seemed to grow, emboldened as 2 men who appeared to be his friends stepped out of the crowd to flank him.
Did I just hear right? Is that kid?
The man pointed at Todoroki.
Shoto? Endeavor's kid?
Todoroki stiffened, and Midoriya shot the man a challenging glare that he didn't see. Shota sent both boys a warning glance before turning his attention back to the man in front of him and his equally disagreeable partners.
Respectfully,
Shota said, anything but.
I don't see how it matters to you, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me and my students— no, you don't!
One of the man's sidekicks grunted, shouldering his way forward.
What, you little shits think you can get the world handed to you on a silver platter and then just come out in public and flaunt it? Is this going anywhere productive, sir?
Shota growled, leveling one of his more intense glares at the 2 men who'd stopped them so far, and feeling an ounce of satisfaction when they both faltered. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to pin the 3rd man with the same glare, and he stepped forward to continue where his friends had left off, Shota's students growing increasingly more uncomfortable behind him, and a crowd beginning to form, hushed murmurs running around the edge of people. Shota didn't like this. More importantly, his students didn't like this.
I don't know. You tell me.
The 3rd man growled, grabbing Shota by the capture weapon, when really, how idiotic was this man to go up against an armed pro-hero in public with 9 in-training heroic students from one of the world's top heroic students right behind it?
When is the rest of the world gonna wake up and realize that those kids behind you are the real villains?
An angry, borderline scandalized gasp came from Ida's direction, and Shota held out a hand to keep both him and Ashino from stepping forward, as both looked ready to do in his peripheral vision.
Okay, boomer,
came Todoroki's murmur, and Uraraka wasn't the only one to horn in a snort of laughter there, followed by a more vehement shout as the man's fist tightened angrily around Shota's capture weapon. "Don't touch him!" came Jiro's anger demand, and Shota reiterated his outstretched stand down hand signal backwards. He heard her snort in frustration, but a part of him felt a little warm knowing that his students cared enough to stand up for him, however unnecessary it was. Focus on the matter red hand, Shota, he scolded himself.
Sir.
Shota responded, voice cold.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to let go before I call the police on you for assaulting a pro-hero.
From the corner of his vision, he caught Ojiro's eye, and with the hand not signaling for Ida and Ashito to stand down, made a silent gesture he taught his class just a week or 2 prior for use in nonverbal situations. "Keep civilians back," it said, and Ojiro nodded grimly before whispering something in Uraraka's ear, the 2 of them beginning to walk towards the edge of the crowd to push them back in case Shota had to use force to get these men to back down.
"Oh, yeah?"
The first man to speak up sneered as he and his friends surrounded Shota on either side of him.
"And what are you gonna do about it, huh? These little pissheads really care about you, don't they?"
he said mockingly as his left hand crept towards his belt.
"You're really gonna set a bad example for them? Maybe we should teach all you fuckers a lesson."
Shota's eyes flashed red, and a moment later, all 3 of the men who'd surrounded him a second prior were prone on the ground, bound together by Shota's capture tape. The small switchblade the man who'd been speaking had pulled out a second beforehand was pressed tightly against the man's palm, the sharp blade pressing into the meat of his hand just hard enough to draw a few beads of blood that dripped down between his fingers. The crowd gasped in the background, but Shota didn't pay any attention, past being grateful that Ojiro and Uraraka had gotten them back far enough that no civilians had been put in danger, despite Shota having the situation under control. As Shota heard Yaoyorozu calling the police in the background, Shota knelt halfway down to the group of men glaring up at him venomously.
"Let me give you some advice,"
Shota bit out coldly.
"First, if you have a problem with the system, don't take it out on the people who are working to change it."
Images of Endeavor's changing behavior crossed his mind, as did Shinso's face when he learned he'd made it into the hero program despite his lack of a combat-based quirk.
Second, don't threaten or try and take on a pro hero and 9 pro heroes in training in public around innocent people. Third,
Shota pulled his capture weapon tighter, ignoring the venomous glares the men entrapped in it shot him as he leaned down so only they could hear.
Don't threaten my kids.
A moment later, mall security guards rounded the corner, and Shota left the men to them, not looking back as his students trailed along behind him, talking in hushed tones amongst themselves. Shota had insisted that they finish the shopping trip, refusing to let the kids' outing be spoiled by a few disillusioned assholes, as he'd carefully called it, much to Ida's sputtering indignation and Hagagare and Rina's cheers. That didn't mean he wanted to talk about it to anyone else when they got back to the dorm. So imagine Shota's non-surprise when, later that night, he was tagged in the 1A chat about what had happened, despite making his feelings on talking about the event clear. Problem Children, group chat, 1932. Kiklian. Boss, what was that last thing he said to them?
Boss, I don't know what you're talking about.
Alien Queen. Come on, Susie! We all want to know! Just tell us!
Boss, I told them 2 things. That's it.
Nyum.
Boss, what, Ida?
Fucking never.
He doesn't approve of lying. Kung Fu Panda. You might just want to say it, sir. She has that look in her eye. You know the one? Boss, again, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said nothing you couldn't hear.
Kiklian. Well, we gave you a chance. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Alien Queen. Kids. Shota felt like dread coil in the pit of his stomach as he opened the video to see Agakare in the same clothes she'd worn at the mall, waving down his ashi on UA's campus. This must have been taken today, he thought, recognizing Mike's clothes also being the same that he'd been wearing earlier. As he watched the video, his horror grew, and to make matters worse, it was captioned for those hard of hearing, or, in other words, Bakugo.
Hey, present Mike-sensei!
Agagare called, and once she was close enough, his ashi turned around, a stack of papers cradled in his arms.
Hey, Maumi!
He practically crooned, starting half of a ridiculously elaborate handshake he could only complete with one hand once Hagagare got up to him.
What's up? I heard you had a bit of trouble at the mall today? Yeah, actually, that's kind of what we were hoping to ask you about.
Hagagare's shit-eating grin couldn't be seen, but hell if it couldn't be heard in her voice.
You can read lips, right?
You bet I can! Mike crowed, tilting his chin up proudly. Comes with your quirk making you half deaf! He laughed as if it weren't a disability, which, in his eyes, it likely wasn't.
Having the time for Bakugo,
came Ashido's mutter from behind the camera, barely audible over his Ashi's laughter.
I was wondering if you could tell us what someone said then?
Agakare asked, her voice portraying nothing but innocence, which is how you knew she was up to no good.
We have a pretty clear video of what someone's saying, but we can't hear it. Can you help?
Sure thing, little listeners! Mike agreed readily, leaning over the pile of papers stacked high in his arms as Hagakare pulled the video up on her phone.
Okay, it's start here.
Hagakare chirped, and Mike glanced down at the screen for a second before frowning in confusion right after Hagakare hit play. Is that Shota? He asked with a single raised brow, only to get a hurried shh from both the girls before him.
There!
Hagakare pointed at the phone, or at least the way her clothes moved made it appear like she did.
Right there, what's he saying?
I missed it! Mike admitted sheepishly to the groans of both girls. Replay it! Hagakare complied a little impatiently, and after the video ended, Mike's eyes grew wide as saucers as he stared at the phone screen in silence. Present Mike? Ashino started to ask right before he let out a screech so loud and high-pitched that by the view of the camera, it caused Ashino to drop her phone and crack her lens, effectively ending the video. Alien Queen. So, Evan the top for my now broken phone camera. No worries, I'm due for an upgrade soon. Anyway,
But after that, you'll never believe what presentation Michael told the sensei said as the third thing.
Boss, Ashinomina, don't you dare.
Kekleon. There is no use in denying it now, sensei.
Small Bean, you can't just keep us waiting like this.
Alien Green. Wednesday, Kagakane is doing something for dramatic effect. Kekleon added Scram, present Mike, to the chat.
Scram.
Don't threaten my kids! Scram changed Boss, Aizawa showed his name, to Danzawa. Pikachu.
I'm screaming!
Kekleon. There's no denying it now, sensei.
Mr. Murder.
Damn! I can't even bring myself to disagree about Bakugo.
Fucking never. Izuku and I could use a new dad. Sure, why not?
Small Bean.
Todoroki!
Danzawa.
Scram.
Embrace it, Jonah!
Danzawa removed Scram, present Mike, from the chat. Shota stared at his phone screen, watching the class chat blow up with more messages, and decided,
no, not today.
And so he murmured, fuck this.
Quietly, but with passion, to himself, left his phone charging on his kitchenette counter, and went to bed before 10 p.m. for the first time in months. They might have a point, he conceded, but like hell, was he going to tell them that now?